might draw back for a moment from the instant issue of racing and wagering, and recognising that we have an international audience here, ask you to share with us some insights into the changes at the macroeconomic level in China over, say, the last 15 to 20 years.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you very much. And first of all, let me say how much an honor I have to be invited by ARC to be on this distinguished panel this afternoon. I'm Hong Kong Chinese, but I've been working in mainland China since the early 90s, as Andrew said, as a management consultant. And so I really have the privilege of having not only worked with many organizations, but also have witnessed the rapid changes in China over the last 2 decades or more. I have to say that this period of China, as a Chinese myself, we really felt extremely privileged to have seen this unprecedented changes in China in everything that we do as a country and as Chinese. And to your question, Andrew, on the macroeconomic conditions, 20 years ago, when I started working in China, there was no concept of what a company was. Think about this. There's no concept of what a company was. Everything at that time, or every organization, was merely an enterprise. So when we say state-owned company, in fact, they were state-owned enterprises. Of course, there was no company law as we understand it today in modern sort of management and governance. So in this period of time, over the last 20 years, really we have seen China evolved from a closed economy to now still not entirely open, but highly integrated with the rest of the world. Many sectors have been increasingly deregulated. When I first returned to China to do consulting, almost all the sectors were closed, kind of like the racing or the wagering sort of business today in China. But nonetheless, as we look at what happened in China in the last 20 years, increasingly sectors have been open, has been deregulated, and increasingly non-state capital, including Chinese privately-owned companies, as well as the foreign multinational companies, are now allowed to get into many of the sectors. So I think over the last 20 years, Andrew, what I characterize China is a continuous opening of China to private capital as well as the rest of the world, continuous development of the private sector, in particular the Chinese entrepreneurs. Yet at the same time, we're still seeing a fairly dominant role of the Chinese government in how they sort of direct the economy, direct the society, and of course, as you mentioned already, an increasing integration of China into the rest of the world.
Ed, you used the phrase continuous. Is that synonymous with gradual? Is the change gradual, or in some circumstances is it discontinuous?
Well, yeah, when I use continuous, it's both actually gradual and also abrupt. And both gradual phenomenon and abrupt phenomenon happen in China at the same time. And many people find it sort of contradictory, but in fact, that is the situation in China. As I mentioned, if we take a step back and what happened in the last 20, maybe 25 years, in a way, the development has been very fast. A lot of things are happening, but if you draw a curve, it's a pretty gradual curve of growth. The opening of China into the rest of the world has been a gradual process. But nonetheless, if you look at every specific data point carefully, for example, by industry, there are situations that by industries that the changes have been very abrupt. In other words, overnight, or literally overnight, the Chinese government can announce or can decide that a certain sector can open up right away. Today it was closed, tomorrow it could be open. And so, many of the changes actually can be quite discontinuous. But if you put all the discontinuous together, it's actually a gradual process.
And in terms of the experience of some of the multinationals that you've advised, I mean, they count in the tens, if not the hundreds. Are there some common mistakes? I mean, I've read you say that one of the mistakes might be to assume that China is one market, and another might be to underappreciate the importance of government relationships.
Well, I think there have been many pitfalls that foreign companies have made in China. But nonetheless, over the years, there also have been an increasing number of multinational companies who have in my terminology, sort of have figured it out, what to do to be successful. But nonetheless, the learning process has been an extensive one. I think the fundamental challenge for many multinationals is that they really don't have a deep understanding of what China is. First of all, what is China? Who is China? Why is China different than where I come from, wherever I do? And how do I reconcile differences? That's number one. So an objective and deep understanding of China is a must. Second is many multinationals, and paradoxically, the more successful and more powerful you are on the other parts of the world, the more likely you actually run into this kind of challenges in China, is that you believe that you already have developed a successful formula to run business on a global basis, and therefore running business in China must be the same. So follow the same way. I'm successful in America, I'm successful in Germany, I'm successful in France or New Zealand. I take the same operating model and plug and play in China. In some cases, it may work, but that would be extremely minority of the cases. In almost all cases, companies find that, in fact, somehow, like it or not, China is different. And China changes quite rapidly, as we said. And therefore, companies need to figure out how do you adapt your business model? How do you adapt your operating model into China so that you actually can be successful? And I say this internal driven reasons is probably the most prevalent or most common reasons why foreign companies have not been successful in China.
Let's try and mine some of the information that we received in Part A. Kim Mack explained, I think, very expertly the matrix. You've got the vertical lines coming down from the State Council or the central government, and the horizontal lines of national, provincial and municipal government. And we see that too in terms of the approval of race meetings. Patrick, the race meeting that you staged, at what level was that sanctioned? At the local government level, the provincial government level, or the national level?
It would have come from local government level. They came from that. They were the guys that we mostly dealt with, was the Wenjiang government and the local sports bureau.
I see. And Teo Ah King, in terms of the work that you've done both in Inner Mongolia and Tianjin, in terms of navigating that extraordinarily complex chessboard, to what extent are things such as partnerships with state-owned enterprises part of the mix that might assist success there?
Well, we have found for the last 3.5 years, it is challenging, and for the kind of cross-cultural partnership, especially when we are invited to come in and the state have some stake in the project. I think it's always very prudent for those who are interested to always understand that the land in China are not freehold. Number one, they are ultimately the landowner, and number two is that the lands are all leased, and that perhaps pose some financial sort of collateral issues for those who are investing. But we have been very grateful that we work with Tianjin, which is one of the 4 major municipalities in the whole China, and we work with Hohhot, the city level, with the mayor. I think that has been very insightful. But of course, I think there are many ways that we can continue to learn.
You mentioned, so far as Tianjin is concerned, that currently the development plans there are under review. What are the sorts of questions that will be part of that review, to the extent that you could share them with us?
Well, many of us realize that the Beijing is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, metropolis in China, and they are expanding eastwards with towards the port, and the Tianjin being the port city of the northern China, and sandwiched in between is the state of Hebei. So the current plan is to have Tianjin to move within different direction, but emphasis the axis towards Tianjin. And there is a massive master plan review, the entire corridor of 200 kilometers. And our proposal smack right within the axis. And therefore, in terms of land utilization, access, in terms of acquiring disease-free zone, all pose a lot of challenges for some of this master planning.
I understand. Michael Connolly, you've faced challenges too in terms of what you've achieved.
Yeah, we are in the unenviable position of being, and I say that carefully and considered and with experience,
of being the first mover in the feed industry, in the horse feed and performance horse feed industry in China. This experience has been really a roller coaster of complications and learning. I think one of the first things we would have learned is that in business in China, ultimately, your best partner and only partner will be government. The complexity of the registration process, which you talked about, the structures of how things happen in China and how business works. The complexities of moving goalposts when it came down to things, and some of the audience may understand this. You know, you have a feed which is used in 50 countries around the world, and you want to try and get it into China. You have customers in China who want to buy the product, and we want to become a stakeholder in this emerging industry. So how do you do it? Well, it took us 2 years just to figure out how we could even start the registration process. Now, some of that is our own naivety, and hugely helpful is the Irish food industry and the Irish government, who have, through their embassy, helped us significantly. And that was the beginning of the learning curve. And after that, then, the simple difficulties of finding a laboratory who could actually test our product the way the Chinese laboratory would test it. That was the biggest problem, because there wasn't at that time a laboratory outside of China who could actually do the test in a way that the methodology complied.
Thanks, Michael. Winfried, what have been the Jockey Club's learnings? I mean, a number of projects over more than a decade, Beijing Clubhouse, the Sichuan reconstruction. What have been the club's learnings?
I think definitely our advantage is that we have had significant capital projects in China we executed. For example, the Beijing Clubhouse, this is a significant project we had. We had around 600 million, 700 million we put into buildings into Sichuan, where we in a way controlled everything. We didn't build them, but we had the government control process. But even I think we faced issues in Shungfa, because I think if one looks at it, is an environment protected area. So the environmental assessment study, we definitely underestimated this significantly, because I think we are in a very environment protected area. So I think it took significantly more time to get the different approvals. And again, in a way, if you look now, the complexity of the matrix structure in China, where when it comes to for example, feed medication, where you need, in a way, really a government sponsor who really helps you to take this process through. That is probably our second learning, that because our requirements is very clear. The horses trained there have the same requirement in medication we have in Hong Kong. Fortunately, we had due to the sponsorship of the Hong Kong government and the very strong collaboration Hong Kong government and our contribution we made over the years with Olympic equestrian here in Hong Kong, with the Asian Games, we are well known. And therefore, we have the complete alignment, what I think is absolutely necessary when you go into, especially in an area where horse racing, even it's only training of horse races involved, when you need the approval of the State Council. We always cooperate, everything we do, we cooperate with really the central government. And then you have to bring it down to the provincial level. You have to do the next level is the city level, the Guangzhou level, and then you have to go even in the Shungfa and the very local level. So this kind of engagement process and stakeholder management process is key. Our biggest challenge, I think, and our biggest chance at the other end is what we think is a capability building if it comes to really everything which is necessary for the base of a good horse racing training industry. And we are at the moment in very intensive discussion, because everybody who attended the workshop in relation to training of staff would know that everything we have is practically on e-learning platforms, that we have dedicated modules where you can take somebody who has no understanding of horses to become, within a certain period of time, if he has the right attitude, to become a horse groom, to become a work rider. So, and I think we have licenses, and we have, in a way, now we want to transfer this capability building into China. So, and that, again, takes significant approval processes, in a way, to take learnings we have there into a Chinese environment. And one has to adapt to a different governance framework.
Thanks, Wilfred. Well, picking up on that point that you made last, in terms of the software and what the Jockey Club's developed to do to deliver that need, which is to develop a workforce that can lay on top of the hardware. We know it's a challenge, and we've seen, say, in the case of Patrick Chengdu and Teo King with the festival, that it's a fly-in, fly-out approach. How do you make the transition to developing a local workforce? I mean, surely it can't be sustainable to operate on the basis of providing all of the workforce needs from overseas.
Well, I think we need partners, as I mentioned earlier on, the international partner, and also guided by we have an International Advisory Council, and I would say that everybody understands that the road ahead is challenging, but it's full of promises, and to bring the Chinese out of China to engage into a group race, international standard races, and that is less challenging as of hosting a Group 1 race, so if there is one in China. But because of the objective of China Horse Club for the next 5-10 years, we have decided that these two programs must move in tandem. That means there will be races in China, selected races, and there will be also a CECF overseas.
Thank you. If I look at those two issues, the complexity of the regulatory matrix and the labour force requirement and the need to sort of develop that domestically in terms of a realistic long-term solution, Louis, what role can the International Federation play in these areas?
Well, I think the first thing I would like to say is that the experience in Howard was a very successful international cooperation. It's the first time that several racing authorities have been working together to help for the organization of that kind of meeting. Just a few examples. The panel of stewards, we all remember the discussion on interferences and different policies, was from 3 countries. The stall handlers, you had 3 from France and 2 from Macau. And it was like that all the day with different people from different countries, which shows that with such an ambition of everybody to be there in China and to participate to the development of racing, you can get people working together. But clearly, the experience has been showing several lessons which are important. Well, first, the international movement is vital. We had a forum on international movement of horses. We are working with you, Winfried, and all of us in order to facilitate the movement of international horses with the high quality, high horse performance, high health concept. And there will be a very important meeting in Hawaii to push that model. So I think one of the priorities is really to deal with international movement of horses, with quarantine issues. There is still some very big issues to solve between China and many countries around the world about the quarantine situation. So that's an absolute priority.
Louis, can I draw you back to the question, though? And the question is this. I mean, we've seen from the material we've seen earlier that China doesn't lack racing. It's had racing for quite some time. And I'm wondering, what is the difference in terms of a qualitative factor of staging these meetings that involve international participation? How's that going to work the oracle, I mean, in your view?
My feeling is that from what you saw today, clearly the first problem is the matrix. I've been very interested to hear the representative of Chinese Equestrian Association Now we have a telephone number, and so we can be in direct contact with her. And then the CHIA. But when you look at the presentation, they both want to become member of ARF and IFHA, but we have a clear need for a central authority. I think they have to get together the Minister of Sport and the Minister of Agriculture. Well, there is clearly a stud book issue to oblige horses to register. Which has to be the rule and was clearly explained. Because when you look at the last statistic, there was a very small number of horses registered. So it's very important. And then we have to have in front of us a regularity body that will implement national rules of racing. There is no chance to see the horse racing industry developing in China if we have only provincial initiatives. They are very important because, as was said earlier, it's a local government who gives the authorization, whether it's Inner Mongolia or whether it's Chengdu. But it's a very expensive exercise to organize a meeting with international people involved in that. So we need a circuit because we found out when the horses were brought to Hoth, there was a sale. And the average cost of the horse arriving in China was about 20,000 euros. And they were put for sale. And it was very difficult to find owners to buy these horses because there is no circuit of horses. The owners who are there, they will buy for less than 5,000 euros because the prize money for Hoth was 430,000 euros for all the races. But the following meeting, 3 weeks or 1 month later, was a very, very small amount. First, we need rules of racing. Well, the education part is fundamental because without integrity, there will never be an industry recognized by the government to go to the following steps, which clearly is a gambling issue. First, you have to guarantee the rules. You need a central authority that will rule the industry, and IFHA can cooperate because with the international agreement on racing and breeding, we have the basis, and the rules we applied in Hoth were all based on the international agreement on racing, breeding, and wagering that everybody in that room is knowing and applying in their national rule. So central authority,
thank you.
National rules,
yes,
educational part, integrity of the sport, and I think the last point that was mentioned by Theo King is very important. We must encourage the Chinese investors to invest in Europe, in America, in Australia, in all our countries, to be educated to the ownership of horses. And experience like the Chinese horse clubs are vital, I think, for the development of ownership. It will not come just like that because there is some provincial initiative. You need a coordinated approach from all the racing authorities around the world to encourage clubs of Chinese owners and to give them the possibility to be entertained when they go outside their country. There is more and more facilities for them to visit foreign countries, and they must have an incentive to come in Ireland, in England, in Australia, is to see their horses running.
Very good. You touched on the movement of horses, and we know that in terms of what's possible now, that stems from the Asian Games that the Hong Kong Jockey Club assisted in staging, the equine disease-free zone, which was a first in terms of its recognition by the OIE. What's the next step, do you think, Winfried, in terms of the movement of horses so far as China is concerned?
I think, in a way, if it comes to the movement of horses, I think in the cooperation with the OIE, we have for the equestrian as well as for the horse racing side, we have developed the bubble concept, which is principally endorsed that for a certain period of time, if there are the right circumstances from health monitoring of animals in the region, etc., that for a very limited period of time, you can bring horses in and out. But I think this in and out concept is, as we know, extremely expensive. I personally think that is a much longer way to get to a more integrated approach of a wider China equine disease-free zones. And especially the problem is, at the moment, you can only bring horses into China, international horses, but at the moment it is not possible practically to have a competition of China-based horses and international horses. And if the industry wants to develop, it is wonderful to have for awareness building, for the marketing purpose, have international events. But the integration of a potential China horse racing or horse breeding industry, or participation of horses who are bred in China into events even in China, combining with international horses, I think that's in Ireland you say it's a long way to Tipperary, and that I think I would not be so optimistic that this is really feasible within the next 5 to 6 years at least.
Well, you mentioned Tipperary. I'm going to have to ask a question of our Irishman then. Louis, and this is questions to Michael, you mentioned prize money. You gave the example. The horse costs €20,000. The prize money is attractive for one day, and then it drops to nothing. So this raises the issue of what's the sustainable model? Michael?
Well,
Michael. No, Michael.
It's a very good question. I have. In preparation for this meeting, I consulted with, we supply about 70 stables in China, all in different sports. And I posed the question, is anybody actually making money out of horses in China? And the answer is, of course, yes. But when you actually drill down, there's very few. And if they are, have they actually recouped the initial investment? Another good question. The feasibility of the industry, we need stakeholders. This industry needs stakeholders. Red Mills is a stakeholder in China, and we are the official feed of the Chinese Equestrian Association. That's our commitment. Last year, in terms of the soft capital, of the software, because the biggest problem with this industry in terms of the long-term goal that a Chinese bred horse wins the Hong Kong Cup. Wonderful. That's a dream, and that would be something that will drive all Chinese forward. But is that feasible when the guys in the stable really don't know anything about horses and have no affinity to horses? And to that end, we just we see the long term, we see the scale, we see the potential. Yes, we've sponsored over 200 technical support visits this year in 2013 and 14 in the last 12 months. And we see that without people really being able to make money and without capturing the hearts and minds of the sports people in China, I don't know where this industry can go or how fast it's going to go. Our impression is it's a slow boat.
Well, Teo King, you referred to this as the equine value chain. And in terms of what you've identified as your progression to achieving sort of an unlocking or a connection with the equine value chain. First, networking and data collection. Then by 2020, you hope to realise the equine value chain, and you refer to the equine value chain as perhaps including real estate development. What I'm hungry to know is, how do you make the transition?
The equine value chain, some of the elements in the chain would not possibly be undertaken by private sector, or for that matter, a joint venture. It has to be solely agreed and sponsored and supported by government, right? And having said that, as what earlier we discussed, a lack of other incentive to raise, which is common in other jurisdictions, there must be, and the Chinese investors and stakeholders are quite creative. So they are in lieu of, but we are not encouraging, based on our own internal discussion, to use the real estate to sponsor or support a proper horse racing or training facilities. So this is in the short term, medium to short term. We think that because of land mass required, one of the critical elements for the equine value chain has to be a real estate component. But the real estate component would not be and should not be the underpinning, the wheel behind these industries.
What should underpin it?
The first thing first that we realize, for this wheel to work, first and foremost, the country, or whether a province or a state, must have requisite all the software before even the authority can even consider to recognize it as an international standard kind of horse racing recognized. So you have a catch-22 situation. And first, therefore, and based on all the internal discussion for the IAC, it is very important to have like-minded investors who would be able to do it in their own small way, but push at their own specialties to education, drug, all the standards. And we are very happy to work with International Federation, to work with all the international recognized body, to bring all this knowledge in, to offer it free of charge and without return, just as a passionate a way to demonstrate to a great nation in China who for thousands of years have possessed this tremendous horse knowledge. It's just how to re-energize it, and with the lack of 70 years of vacuum, how to fast-track it. That's the little part that we think it can be done.
Louis, a short answer from you, if I can, on this. You've referred to prize money several times as being essential. How do you fund prize money? We heard in the first session of this conference, we're now in the last session of this conference, that unless you're in the happy position of Dubai, it has to come from wagering.
No, I think it's very clear. We've been told in the presentation that there was 16 race courses in China. Some are very impressive race courses. When you look at the stands from Wuhan, they are very impressive. And we know that Wuhan has great difficulties to finance their program. Is looking for partners, is looking desperately for sponsors just for the maintenance of their race courses. So it's very clear that there must be a financial solution. So, well, maybe I will be unpopular in saying that, but I think the first step would be to organize betting on international race where the integrity is well known and recognized, but as was mentioned earlier, not with a 32% rate of tax, because then you will encourage illegal betting. So you must have a very reasonable level of tax, some return for the community, that's very important. You know the model better than we do in Hong Kong. With return for the provinces, I think it's very important that a part of the return is going to the provinces, and with a return to the racing organizer for prize money, race course maintenance. So I think if you do not apply a first step like that in China, we may be there back at the next conference in the same situation.
Trying to crystallize your answer, betting is essential.
Betting is essential, but I accept the argument that betting must be with absolute integrity. There has been example for the sport in China. We show how difficult it is, especially when you start from such a low situation. So it is very, very important, but I think that's the only way to organize it.
But Winfried, you framed the session by asking, what's the sustainable model?
I think the sustainable model is a long-term view. And I personally think if it comes to wagering, even on foreign races, I think it's a very, very long shot. Because I think if you look at the framework, at the moment it's very clear there is a sports lottery. There is a social welfare lottery. And there is a very careful watching what the social welfare lottery does and the sports lottery does. And especially if one looks at significant revenues have been generated for social welfare, there is a very close tension between different stakeholders. But coming back, what I personally think is a sustainable model, and the first one is that I personally think we have to start with basics. And the basics is that we have to draw a regulatory framework. And that on this basis, we do a step-by-step approach. I can only say that we as Asian Racing Federation definitely are welcome in a way the initiative from the Sports China Equestrian Association, who wants in a way the support to develop in a way horse racing. And we in a way have always been very close working with the China Equestrian Association. And we will in a way extend and have extended already our support as Asian Racing Federation to develop a governance framework, or what could be a governance framework for horse racing in China, so that one is really clear what are the requirements there to provide a sound basis from a sporting governance point of view. The other way of in relation to horse racing in China, it will be a very long way, and it will be a step-by-step approach. I personally think there will be certain pilot projects, there will be certain initiatives of different groups. But I would not be that optimistic that we would see a significant change, especially when it comes to the gaming wagering side, because this is a highly political and highly political charged topic. And without, and I agree with Louis, without the basis of a really top-class integrity of the sport, considering wagering on races in China is a long shot.
Thank you, Winfried. Dr. Zay, so far as the sports lottery gaming market is concerned, what's your characterisation of the current state of that market and the likelihood of its current arrangements changing?
You mean the sports lottery?
Yes.
To racing.
To racing, transitioning.
Sorry?
Transitioning. So that I'm clear, we have the two lotteries, sports
Yes,
and
I know,
welfare.
yeah.
As I understand the current regulatory arrangement, if there were to be betting, it would be under that framework.
Right.
And what do you think the prospects are of that becoming permissible?
I perhaps am not in the best position to sort of comment on this specifically, but nonetheless, as I mentioned at the beginning, one of the biggest trends that I've seen in the last 20 years or more in China is that the Chinese government have continuously deregulated the sectors in China one by one in a gradual process. In other words, the sectors that were closed, let's say 20 years ago, many of them today are open. But at the same time, not every sectors are open. And therefore, when we look at every of the specific sectors that are relevant to our interests, sports lottery, the welfare lottery, as well as Winfried said, the racing and wagering, I think they are all in different positions in this overall space of the deregulation matrix that we can visualize. My personal view is that over time, all these will continue to be deregulated. Perhaps today, we don't necessarily see an imminent change or open up of something, for example, like Winfried said, the thoroughbred racing, the wagering that's related to it. But you never know, actually. My view is that if there are enough people who have the will, who have the interest, and can work with the Chinese government, albeit it's a very complicated framework, as we said. But there is a will and there's a way to work with the government, and as Winfried said, has a systematic approach to understand the needs of the various stakeholders involved and have a systematic approach to manage it, and manage it with a consistent proposition, a consistent strategy. That you never know, actually, at some point that could abruptly open. I cannot say exactly when that's going to happen, but I know that if we do the right things and we align the capabilities on this side, in fact, there is a good chance that at some point in the future, something is going to happen. In the Chinese way, however, usually this opening or deregulation will happen on an experimental basis first. So, the government will say, I give you a pilot, or I give you a couple of pilots. Why don't you go and try it out? And I make observations on how it happens.
Guangzhou?
Could be, I cannot predict precisely, but the tendency for the Chinese to accept something that's new, something that's, a priori was considered as almost unacceptable or impossible, is normally through pilots. And the more pilots they do, the more perhaps comfortable, or the more willingness for them to adapt to what they believe would be the right framework or the right move for them. So my sense is, don't treat China as a stationary picture. Yet at the same time, it's very complicated, have multiple stakeholders. But there's a way to deal with it. There's a strategy that you could actually develop a strategy collectively to work with the stakeholders on the China side to actually create a win-win situation at some given point in time. That will be very possible.
Are there any other questions? That being so, I will invite the chairman, if he wishes to make a closing observation.
Probably I can do this without standing, but I think I feel probably after now 2.5 hours, I feel a little bit like standing. I personally think today was, for me, a very open and very fact-finding discussion we had in the first meeting, which I personally think highlighted the vision, obviously, of the Equestrian Association and equestrian industry stakeholders in China, that they have called on us to cooperate. We have definitely learned there is a significant gap between what is necessary to conduct racing in a way we all know it in our jurisdictions. But I personally think the vision, in a way, in the direction that one would like to cooperate with us was a very positive message. The complications are definitely with matrix systems should not be underestimated, but I found it very helpful that we had a discussion here in this panel to share our views, to share our experience. And I personally think it's very clear that we as horse racing authorities, especially I feel that the Asian Racing Federation has to take a specific lead in to help the China horse racing industry to come up with a framework, how the regulatory framework should look like, how in a way you construct a framework under which you can conduct racing in China. And I think then I see as a major issue and a major focus, and we have a lot of experience in a way here in the different sectors, how we can help building capabilities in China which enable them to build up a horse racing industry based on integrity and on horse knowledge. The third work stream is definitely when it comes to the veterinary side, because one of the key issues and the key obstacles I see going forward is veterinary care. And that needs, probably besides the horse racing industry, this needs a much more wider approach of different stakeholders to connect. Because I firmly believe if it comes to horse welfare, it is an absolutely must. Furthermore, in a way, then the next step comes in relation to how we organize these work streams, how we can try to collaborate around the world and draw on resources. But this is something we definitely will discuss in the next Asian Racing Federation meeting, and we will discuss in the next Asian Racing Conference in India. So I would like, in a way, to draw your attention when we have the next Asian Racing Conference in India, but this definitely will be a follow-up topic where we would like then to report about progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you.